All right. We are going to start our workshop prior to the board meeting now. And the topic is Ref Tell Us, or the presenter is Ref Tell Us.
Can you hear us, Todd?
I sure can. Can you hear me okay?
Yep,
We can.
Yep.
loud and clear.
Great, great.
Man with many screens, huh?
And Todd, I can't
Yes.
recall when he provided the presentation. It was before the election.
Yes.
Todd, we have a few new board members here. Could you
Okay.
just provide a brief introduction of yourself?
Okay. My name is Todd Cristiano. I'm with Raftellus. Paul retained our services back in, I think, May of 2023 to conduct a comprehensive water, wastewater financial plan and rate study and plant investment fee study. We worked through that. We presented preliminary findings back in about a year ago, October of 2023. Presented 3 water scenarios and a wastewater scenario financial plan and what the revenue adjustments would need to be to fund capital projects. And that got set aside, and here we are today to talk about kind of the final portion, which is the rate component of it.
Okay, thanks. You can keep going.
Okay, so I don't know if there'd be an introduction by Paul or not, so I can jump right in if that's what you'd like.
So we had started this rate study, and the previous board had asked for some changes, some different things to look at. And then just with our busy schedule with the election and all the things in the DDA, this has been pushed for multiple work sessions. So we're finally at a point where we can present this. So they've got some new rate structure, and they're going to go over that with you. And hopefully it addresses the concerns that the board had previously with this new approach.
Okay.
All right, great. Thanks, Paul. And I'll just jump right in here. I've got about 10 or 12 slides to run through here. But let me see if I can get my rate study. So we'll talk about the rate study update, which I just mentioned. We'll go through the rate structure review process that we worked through with Paul in terms of coming up with a rate structure alternative for water that meets the goals and objectives of what we had discussed with the council last time. We'll show a couple of bill comparisons, both residential and commercial. And then we obviously have our peer typical bill survey of surrounding communities of a typical residential bill. So we'll go over that as well. I just mentioned these milestones that we had here. One of the items I didn't go into here was the plant investment fees. We did review that and found that the current fees you had, the levels of fees you have for your plant investment fees were at adequate levels. And we did present in the October board meeting in 2023. So the goal of this rate structure review and adjustment and update was to better align the cost between low volume and high volume users. The way the current rate structure is set up, it doesn't really recognize those potential larger single family or residential homes. They're all treated the same in terms of the SFE billing, and I'll get into that in just a minute. And we wanted to look from a transition from SFE, which is a single family equivalent billing basis, to an EQR billing basis. Those both mean kind of the same thing, single family equivalent and equivalent residential unit. Those both mean the same thing. But from a billing perspective with the town of Fraser and actually other communities on the Western Slope, the billing system is set up to bill based on SFEs, single family equivalents, which is slightly different than this EQR basis, which is used as part of the wastewater treatment plant agreement in measuring the amount of capacity available for the town of Fraser at the plant. And I'll show you a schedule here and what those differences are.
Can you remind me what EQR stands for?
Equivalent residential unit.
Oh, there it goes. Sorry.
Yeah.
Next box.
So the basic definition, it's a standard unit of measurement that is generally based upon the accepted amount of water used by one single family dwelling unit. You recently did a master plan, and they look at things in terms of EQRs or SFEs in terms of doing the build out and finding out the number of equivalent single family equivalents that will be needed in the future or design capacity to serve that many in the future. So it's a very common thing used in master plans, and it's fairly common on the Western Slope in terms of assessing plant investment fees and assessing a water rate schedule. So nothing too terribly unique to the town of Fraser on this. We look at the current rate structure. We have an SFE value, my tongue twister there. And you can see that based on the customer type, you can see how those SFEs are applied. So a single family unit has a value of 1. And that could be a home with 2 bedrooms and 2 baths. It could be a home with 6 bedroom and 6 baths. The rate schedule is assessed based on 1 SFE. So regardless of the size of the home, their base charge is based off of 1 SFE, $153 per quarter. And then they have a volumetric charge based on the amount of volume they use. So essentially, all residential homes, regardless of the size and regardless of the number of fixtures and the potential water demand, their base charge is the same, regardless of the size of home. And we wanted to recognize by looking at this EQR basis, which has definitions within the contractual agreement for the wastewater treatment plant, that the EQR basis would get us a little closer to accounting for larger and smaller versus larger homes on that. You'll notice that the multifamily units are also considered 1 SFE. So for each dwelling unit of a multifamily complex, and let's say it's a 6-unit complex, each one of those units would be assessed 1 SFE. But we know that the condo complexes and apartment complexes like that, the units there probably use a little less water. The EQR basis methodology kind of recognizes that. Commercial is based on meter size. You can see that as the meter size increases, the number of SFEs increase. So if a commercial customer had a 1-inch meter, they have 2 SFEs. So their base charge, current base charge would be $153 times 2. So there is a bit of scaling there, but there's a lot of customers that are kind of in between a 3/4 inch and 1-inch demand and a 1 and 1.5 inch demand, but that's not really recognized because it's either charged at a 1-inch or a 1.5 inch. So there's not that in between component like what an EQR basis. The text down here at the bottom just has some additional information about multifamily, some of the issues with multifamily and how they have incremental SFEs associated with them if it's a rental unit. But really, what we're focused on here is this billing schedule here for the single family, multifamily, and commercial. So the existing rate structure is based off of SFE, so the base rate, monthly service charge, whatever you want to call it, is based off of these SFE values of 1. The EQR structure recognizes to an extent fixture count, because as you add more fixtures to a home, more bedrooms means there's more people, there's more bathrooms mean more fixtures. There's a relationship between the number of fixtures and the potential demand a home has. So you have a 2-bedroom, 2-bath home, it may have a value of 1 EQR, but as you add bathrooms or bedrooms, you can increase those EQR values incrementally. And it is related to fixture count, because as you add bedrooms, you're probably going to add bathrooms, which there's usually 2 or 3 fixtures in the bathroom. So it better aligns, using an EQR basis, better aligns the demands of that dwelling unit. And right now, it's the EQR measurements when a new tap or a new customer comes online, new parcel, new property comes online. It is the number of EQRs is determined, and that is provided. It's required as part of the wastewater treatment plant agreement, the joint powers agreement with the wastewater treatment plant, to provide that, to make sure that the town of Fraser doesn't exceed their portion of capacity in the system. So it's a measurement of capacity available in the system for on the wastewater side. We're really taking this EQR basis and translating it to on the water side. So that's a little background. So let's look at here a little at the EQR basis methodology. Residential, single family, 1 EQR, that makes sense. And I think that's based off of a 3-bedroom, 3-bath home. But each additional bedroom is 0.2 EQRs. So as the house scales in size in terms of bedrooms and bathrooms, the EQRs will increase as well. You can see multifamily has a slightly less EQR value because if you think about it, there's just, multifamily, the units are smaller, not as much water being used. There's probably no outdoor irrigation or anything like that. So they have a 0.8 basis EQRs. And as you add additional bedrooms, you add 0.6 EQRs to that. So that means when we apply our base charge of $153 per EQR, you might have one single family home that has one EQR value. You might have another that's quite larger, has a number of extra bedrooms that is 1.2 EQR. And we multiply the $153 per quarter times those values of the EQRs for each of those homes. So we're able to scale a little bit better here than with the SFE basis. And again, many communities use this. And so this is not uncommon. And you can see with commercial, this is a little different, whereas currently the SFE basis is based off of meter size. Here, the commercial EQRs are based on the per 1,000 square feet of occupied area. Now you look at this and see 0.6 and 0.3. It's like, well, where do they get those numbers? Well, a lot of these EQR schedules that were determined they were determined back in the day, back in the 70s during the Clean Water Act, when there were a lot of grants going around and loans for building wastewater treatment plants. And a lot of these agreements with utilities had this EQR basis as part of a planning document for those grants or those loans. And they've kind of been left alone over the past couple of years, but a lot of utilities still use them. And the original basis for these values, I'm not quite sure, but they're in use in a lot of places, especially on the Western Slope. So overall, this EQR basis is a little more specific in terms of the particular demands for a size of dwelling unit or commercial entity. So a little bit more flexibility. You'll notice the commercial with the EQRs doesn't rely on meter size because you can have a lot of fixtures on a 1-inch meter. You can have very few fixtures on a 1-inch meter, and those charges would be different. But if they were under the SFE basis, they'd be paying the same charge for a 1-inch meter base charge. So let's take a look at the existing proposed. On the left here is your existing residential and existing commercial. Two components here. The base rate is dollar per bill is $153 for residential. So every quarter, the base charge is $153 whether you use any water at all. There's a tiered structure, meaning as you use more, you pay more. And there's some thresholds here. From tier 1, it's from 0 to 12,000 gallons, it's billed at $1.50. Between 12,000 and 20,000, that increment of usage is billed at $3. And then anything over 20,000 gallons is billed at $6. Unlike commercial, which has a uniform rate of $1.50, it also has the dollar per bill of the $153, but that scales based on the meter size, based on those ratios I showed you in the previous slide. So that's the existing rate structure. Now, with the tiered structure in residential, those tier thresholds do not scale at all with any sort of larger SFE number or anything like that. So that applies to all customers, regardless of the size, regardless of the number of SFEs. The proposed residential structure is a base rate per EQR per bill, which means that $153 is going to be multiplied times the number of EQRs that have been assigned to your home, your dwelling unit. And usually the base is 1. A majority of your customers are 1. There's a handful of customers between 1 and 2 EQRs. But so you might have a larger fixed charge or base charge under this new structure. If you have a 1.2 EQR, it's going to be $153 times 1.2, and that's your base charge. We still retain the 3-tiered structure, but we've changed the thresholds a little bit from 0 to 15,000 gallons, 15 to 30, and then over 30. It's a slight difference, not much of a difference, but this better aligns indoor usage and outdoor usage based on our analysis of the quarterly billing that was given to us. So we just made some slight adjustments there to better align that usage requirements. You can see the rate has gone up to $1.77 for tier 1, $3.53 for tier 2, $7.05 for tier 3. And I do want to stress that in tier 2 and tier 3, if you use 16,000 gallons, you're not getting charged 16,000 gallons times 353. You're getting charged 15,000 gallons at $1.77, and then the next 1,000 gallons at $3.53. So just keep that in mind there. The base rate for commercial and mixed use is the same. It's based off the number of EQRs as the EQR scale, so will that fixed charge. All usage is billed out at $1.77 per 1,000 gallons. So just some slight changes here with EQR, a little bit of change in the tiered thresholds here, but overall it's still a base charge and a volumetric charge. No change there. Now, real quickly, with those changes, from this existing rate structure to this proposed rate structure, we're going to generate a little bit more revenue under this proposed structure because we are basing it off the number of EQRs rather than just one EQR for single family. We do have those single families that are 1.2, 1.6, 2.0. So we are going to accumulate additional revenue, but that revenue is needed to help fund the operations and maintenance expense and the capital program that we had actually looked at in our financial plan scenarios back last year. So this is about the amount of revenue we said you would need to recover in our financial plan from last year. Sorry about that. Let's see. Let's take a look at a residential typically quarterly bill. So what we've done here is we looked at the average usage, the average quarterly usage for a 1 EQR, 1.2 EQR, and a 1.6 EQR single family home. Calculated the bills under existing and proposed rates. And as you can see that under the larger size home, you see a larger increase between the existing and proposed. And that's to be expected because before the $153 of the base charge was not being scaled, with the number of SFEs or EQRs at the time. Let's look at this a little bit differently here. So what we have here is I took an average of the quarterly usage of all one EQR single family customers. I took a look at the average quarterly usage for a 1 EQR customer over a period of a year. Same thing with 1.2 EQRs and same thing as 1.6 EQRs. And you can see that a 1 EQR customer uses about 28,000 gallons a year on average. A 1.2 EQR uses 40,000 and then 77,000. So instead of looking at one bill, which is what I just showed you, we calculated the annual bill for each one of these EQR sizes or residential sizes and divided that by 4 to come up with the average annual bill on a quarterly basis. And that's what this value here shows. Here, let me see. So not much different than before, but I thought it'd be more representative because this way we're taking into consideration the usage across the year, that indoor usage, that higher winter usage in Q1 and the summer usage. And if we average out, we calculate that bill and divide that bill by 4, we can kind of see what the overall quarterly change would be. And you can see again, the 1.6 EQR has the biggest change here. The other two, there's a bit of a change with 1.2 and a fairly nominal change with 1 EQR, which makes sense because 1 EQR and 1 SFE are about the same in terms of the base charge.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
I think I missed your definition of EQR for single family. Is that 1 bedroom or is that 2 bedrooms or what?
I believe in the contract, based on the wastewater contract, it was 3 bedroom, 3 bath. I will have to verify that unless Paul happens to have it.
So 1.0 EQR would be a 3 bedroom, 3 bath.
Or less.
3 bedrooms or 3 baths. So you could have a 2 bedroom, 3 bath. That counts as 1 EQR.
Yeah.
Okay. So you don't start adding to that until you get to 4 bedroom, 4 bath and not.
Right.
And
Okay.
then at what point do you stop adding to
You
it?
don't. So if you had,
Okay,
let's say you built a 10,000 square foot house. with
8,000
10
bedrooms.
It's 0.2 for every bedroom over 3.
okay,
So it scales on, depending on the size of the home.
So
okay.
on that, so one EQR is 3 bedrooms. You go to a 4th bedroom, it adds
0.2.
0.2.
0.2.
And why are you doing bedrooms instead of bathrooms?
It's the way the EQR is defined in the JFC agreement, is 3 bedrooms or 3.
So you're using JLC there for sewer.
Well, that's what we said in EQR, so.
What if they do a bunk room that sleeps 12? The workshop.
I think the reason they use bedrooms, because they assume that's gonna bring more people, and that's the driver of water usage. So you, instead of, if you have an additional bedroom, you might have another person living there that's using or using water or using more water. And maybe that's why they don't associate with bathrooms, because you can add bathrooms, but maybe not add people. Whereas the bedroom assumes you're adding people to the household or adding demand because of person sleeps in a bedroom. That's what I've seen in justification for in these type of schedules in the past.
I believe
And
bunkhouse would come down to the planning. Is that now commercial if we're putting a bunkhouse? So then you're in a commercial.
Well, we do have a lot of.
I know, I'm
properties
gonna
up
have
here.
to. So let's keep it to the board and let's hold your questions till the end, just because
I
we
mean-
only have an hour.
We do have a lot of properties up here with lofts that aren't really a bedroom or a sleeping area that isn't. So there's some of that sort of,
So I think that.
does it depend what they're applying for with the town?
I think at that point, we would then be requiring, we would then be working with the ordinance that's coming later in the fire department that determines what's in there to then change EQRs or number of bedrooms. But we can only go by what the building department tells us, that it's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, or what the county tells us. It's a
What's with the
4-bedroom,
county?
3-bedroom house. Otherwise, we're going into everybody's house to try and figure out what's going on. This just sets a base of, when the house was built, it was 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. So that's 1 EQR. That house was 5-bedroom, 3-bath, that's 1.4 EQR. But I think that this structure is what the board was looking for last time, that
Yeah.
it's not penalizing those with 1 bedroom. There, this is also, he didn't really mention it, but if you go back and you look at it, let's say you have a 2-bedroom, that's only going to be 0.8. So you're actually going to be 0.8 times 153. So your water rates should come down because you don't have as much capacity to use as much water.
Mhm. So like my house, the county has my bedrooms at 3, but it's really 2. Cause it's old, right?
Hmm.
So
you're
It's
still
kind
on
of
EQR then.
But it's the
Yeah.
bathrooms, it's the
You have 3
bathroom count.
bathrooms?
2 bathrooms.
Yeah, so
But they've me as a 3-bedroom, 1 bath
so I think then that's just working with
It's
the
just a
county
weird
to get things changed.
thing.
It doesn't really matter. It's still 1
Well,
EQR.
if it was 2,
It's 3 or less, right? It's 1.
no, 2 would be 0.8.
So that
Oh,
would be like
okay.
a
Well, that's not
reduction.
in.
Family, well, single family with 2 bedrooms is 0.8.
So there would be a reduction,
Because it's based on
For those.
EQRs, which would now be 0.8. Yeah.
or do we start at 1?
That's not what this, it's not
It's
in
saying
here.
we're starting at 1.
It just says 1. Then multifamily, it says 0.8 and 0.6. But if it's a
No,
single family home,
So the proposed residential is base rate times EQRs, and the EQRs, you have to go back to the JFOP agreement on what those are set at. I mean, sorry, single family is 1, multifamily is where you get the benefit.
right.
Okay,
So
but
if
not
it's a
for-
single family home, 3 bedrooms,
It doesn't,
baths or less is 1.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
Okay.
we could use Mill Avenue as an example. Those 2 buildings are
It's water.
but the majority of our properties are second homes
Which is number 8.
or vacation rentals that are occupied during the winter. So
Okay. I mean,
that's what I think. Like,
the data is what the
Yeah.
data
Yeah.
is, I guess, but it doesn't look right to me. But anyway.
Well, keep in mind that January billing is actually for December usage.
Right, but
So it's
people
one-
don't water in October through December.
Right, but if there's more activity from rentals or visiting there, yeah, it's this is atypical compared to what you'd see along the Front Range. You obviously see a lot more water usage in the summertime,
Right.
and in the wintertime. Okay, I'll move on here. Looking at commercial. So we picked 3 commercial entities here. And this is kind of challenging, we found, because sometimes we have one account that has 3 meters to it going to 3 different buildings, and that's that one on the right-hand side. But we picked a fast food chain, a distillery, and then I'll call it 3 retail establishments, all under one account, but there's different meter sizes, and they go to 3 different buildings, but it's all billed under one account. Now, the fast food chain, you can see here, this is a typical quarterly bill here. We just average the annual usage here divided by 4 to come up with 81,000 gallons for this fast food chain. Now, the interesting thing, as I understand it, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the location of this fast food chain has changed many times over the years, and the EQRs have remained the same. So at one point in time, the number of EQRs assigned to it may have been more applicable to the original business or the businesses that were there some time ago. The new business that's there now might be something different. They're using maybe a lot more water than the previous entities that were there, or the previous entities had a bunch of EQRs for no reason. I'm not sure, but this is one SFE, which is basically a 3/4 inch meter, and they have 6.14 EQR. So it's a little bit of a mismatch here with the EQRs versus the meter size. You would think you'd see 6 EQRs around a 1.5 or 2 inch meter, but regardless, there are a number of commercial entities that have maybe a smaller meter size. We do have a lot of EQRs, and it just might be because of the number of fixtures they have inside the establishment. We're not sure. I'm just hypothesizing there. But you can see here the change is great because we go from being charged $153 for one SFE to $153 times 6.14. And that's the large driver between that increase. I would say this is kind of an anomaly. There are, like I said, there are some other ones, but I'd say this is kind of an anomaly. The distillery is probably more representative. There were two SFEs associated with that. That's a 1 inch meter, I believe. And they're actually using 2.7 EQRs, and that kind of ties out nicely between the two. So there is a bit of a difference, and that really the difference is being driven by the additional 0.7 EQRs and the fact that we've increased the volume rate from $1.50 to $1.77. The 3 retail establishments are a total of 3 meters. I think there are 2 3/4 inch and 1 1 inch, so a total of 4 SFEs. But the total EQRs are 5.94. These entities are not heavy water use intensive buildings. They're just retail buildings. So there's not a lot of water use, but they're fairly sizable buildings. So there's probably a bit of fixtures in there, hence the reason it goes to 5.94 for all 3 of those. And again, you can see the difference is that we're adding almost 2 EQRs or $153 times 1.94 to get to that 964. So that's a driver for the increase there. And obviously the $1.77 applied to the 31,000 gallons versus $1.50 from the current rate structure. So a little bit different, but let's look at this on a kind of average annual basis. This is just one bill. Let's look at it like over the course of a year, what the average quarterly bill would be over the course of a year. And we can see here the fast food chain, a lot of usage in Q1. And same thing with distillery, it has that large water usage. And then the 3 retail establishments have quite a bit of water usage in that first quarter. And the retail fast food chain, 325,000 gallons per year. That's quite a bit, I think, for that type of fast food chain. The distilleries, about 668,000. And we estimated 124,000 for the 3 retail establishments. So we calculated the annual bill for each one of these under the existing and proposed rates. We divided that by 4 to come up with an average quarterly bill based on that. And the bars are about the same. They're a little bit closer in some respects, but they're still showing that obviously an increase, especially in that fast food chain for the 1 SFE. And these other ones are a little bit closer, but still yet an increase. So what this demonstrates is that before we were assigning based on meter size, so the SFE was scaling based on meter size. But there are those in-between customers, between a 1 inch and a 2 inch or 1 inch and 1.5 inch, where there's demands that are greater than a 1 inch, than typical customers. So the EQR kind of catches that in-between customers with EQRs between a 1.5 inch and a 3 inch, or 2 inch and a 2 inch and a 3 inch. And so that brings the cost or assigns the cost to the higher potential volume users versus the lower, which was the original goal of looking at this. And we've kind of, at least with commercial, you can see we've achieved that quite a bit with some of these customers, because they do have varied SFEs versus EQRs, and much bigger variance there than you would see on.
So can you explain, or if it just comes from the sanitation district, how the EQRs are determined on these retail?
I'll show you here. It's, sorry here. It's based off 1,000 square foot of occupied area. Now, this is not the full list, this table here. There is a laundry list, no pun intended, because laundry is on there. If you look at the agreement, there is a number of ways they're measuring water demands. And I think a laundromat's based on the number of washing machines and that sort of thing. So there's other units of measure that they use to estimate, just like bedrooms for single family. They use other water related things in a home that equate to water usage. And so there might be for some restaurants and things, it might be a bar stool or a number of seats in a restaurant. I'm not sure that was in that in the contract listing there, but there's a whole litany of the different types of commercial enterprises and how those are accounted for, how the demands are accounted for in there. So
Okay.
it's not just square feet of occupied area. There's other measurements they use as well.
And those have already been determined by our wastewater plant.
Well, they're not determined by the way they're determined by the wastewater agreement. The way they were determined before they got into that wastewater agreement, because I imagine that listing that's in the wastewater agreement came from somewhere else. It wasn't, you'd have to do quite the analysis to figure all of that out. So there's kind of these schedules that are all similar like this that have just been used time over time. And I imagine that's where the schedule is in the wastewater agreement, that it came from these other that are just floating out there in the ether, in the rate structure ether of putting and put that in there. I've not seen any analysis done in the recent 20 years that has validated all those values. But the fact is they're used by municipalities for master planning, for things like this, and they're continue to be used. I would say that the
It's
measurements
not
they're
our
using.
schedule, it's a statewide schedule,
No, it's a
industry
schedule.
standard.
You can say it's an industry accepted schedule.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah,
Basically, the more water you use, the higher your EQR value is going to be.
correct. And it's about capacity, because obviously the way the wastewater agreement is that the town of Fraser has a certain amount of capacity in the plant, and they want to be able to tie back as you add new properties, that they want to equate that to an EQR, because they've designed their plant to serve a certain number of EQRs. And they want to make sure the town of Fraser doesn't exceed their EQRs, just as the other communities. And the EQR is kind of a uniform basis to apply against all the entities, rather than having each entity measure it somewhat differently, right? Meter size versus EQR. And so that's the only thing I can surmise from that. I'm not familiar with the contract other than that component, but that would be my guess.
I think to elaborate on your question, each address is assigned EQRs during the planning phase. So
Oh.
at planning, you determine you're gonna have so many square feet or so many tables. I think it's like a 4 or 5 page list of things that you
Okay.
would set your EQRs by. So, for example, we're talking about the fast food chain. At some point previous, it was assigned 6.14 EQRs. Not sure what in what part of the planning process that was assigned, but that's what it's currently is. So when you look at if you look at the 3 retail establishments, they were assigned as the combination of 3 buildings, one of them 2 stories. The total for those 3 buildings is that 5.94 when you add them all up.
Okay, great, thank you for that.
My last slide here just shows a typical bill of 12,000 gallons per quarter for a single family, 1 EQR, most likely with a 3/4 inch meter. Slight jump here. These are the most recent. These other bills here for other communities are based on the most recent rate schedules. I imagine some of them are going to have increases in 2025, so it might push down Fraser down, below the midpoint there, but who knows? We never know what's going to happen with some of the increases here. So at the end of the day, the goal was to evaluate rate structure alternatives with the information you have available to you now, to help better align those costs associated with those potentially higher volume customers versus the lower volume customers, and but still recover all of your revenue required to meet your annual expenditures. So that concludes this. free to answer any additional questions.
Yeah, what are all these municipalities on the EQR methodology?
Not all of them. I know Breckenridge is to an extent. Their commercials based on meter size, their single families based on EQR basis, but how they measure EQRs is a little different. I do think they have bedrooms, which is point two. Steamboat Springs is rate schedule is not, but their plant investment fee is based on fixtures, which is very similar to the EQR basis. They have a whole schedule of different types of fixtures. I'm not sure about Granby.
Now, what's going on in Granby? I mean, they're a real outlier, that
Yeah.
one service district.
And
What-
Paul, maybe you can answer that. You might be more
Yeah.
familiar with Granby there than I am.
So it's the new Sun River area, Sun Communities, they, I believe it was last year, they raised rates by 185%, something like that. So that's why the rates went like that. They're trying to deal with it in other ways, but
And they had to run a whole new water supply
It's a whole
line
new
to them,
water
and
system out there.
it was a challenge because it was going the wrong direction.
unfortunately, that is the workforce housing area that has
Oh.
the really, really high rates. So it's
So-
all the manufactured homes that are there between 34 and 40. going
Right.
towards Hot Sulphur.
What is the difference between you have a blue block and then what color is that?
That's a
Green?
good point. The legend is missing there. I apologize for that. The light blue, I believe, is water, and the darker green there is the wastewater.
Okay.
And so I do want to ask, this is specific to just service fees. This does not include property taxes or anything like that. So some of these other districts and entities may have other income streams that we do not. So
That's
we-
correct.
we're not necessarily comparing apples to oranges when we're looking at some of these jurisdictions.
Yeah.
Or considering the tap fees.
Exactly. That's another.
So what I'm looking for is board consensus that we're okay with this rate structure. And then bring a resolution to change the rates probably towards January, after we can do a nice audit of EQRs and make sure that, for example, that the 6.14 for a fast food chain is relatively close to what the design was before we hit them with that massive charge, but
Yeah, that is a
speaking
big
of that,
one.
I think that, the work that the Rautels was able to do answers a lot of the questions that came up last year around how do we make it for not raise the rates on everybody, but those that are using a lot of water pay a little bit more. So the tiers have changed a little bit. So the tiers are a little bit larger in volume with a slight increase in the volumetric charge. And then we kept the service fee the same. It'll just be multiplied by EQR. So in the multifamily, that should come down a little bit. On the single family, that 153 doesn't change unless you have more bedrooms than 3.
Yeah, I think there's a concern with the commercial. It doesn't correlate to the amount of gallons that they're using to what they're paying. The distillery's using the most and they're paying the least.
So we do, so
It just doesn't,
our JFOC agreement
I understand, but it,
does not differentiate breweries and distilleries the amount of water they would use. So the only way the EQRs could be based for that type of use was, I believe it was tables or serving area size. And so that is why there's sort of a disconnect between the amount of water used versus EQRs assigned, because there was not an EQR value for industrial use.
Is that something that JFOC should be addressing?
It is something that JFOC, I believe, has been working on before I got here.
So
Continuing to work.
so could we use EQRs for residential and something else for commercial? I mean, is that even
So-
possible to have two different kind of,
Previous boards did not
Systems?
want, in the past, it's always just been that flat tier 1 charge, no matter what they did. So unless we were to create a tiered structure on the commercial side, but then are we punishing them for being a successful business because they require water to perform their business? I think it's always been a concern.
I mean, we're charging them for the water they're using is,
It's just at the
Yeah.
1.7. I mean,
The
so
$1
at
dollar 77.
167,000 gallons, they're still paying they're currently paying $1.50 for every 1,000 gallons. Whereas if you have a 6-bedroom house and you end up using 71,000, you're constantly, at some point you get up to $8 per
Well, it seems like that commercial use should be tiered also. Why is it a flat rate for regardless of how much they use?
That's how the board wanted it in the past.
You know, I was in on those decisions a long time ago. It was, we were looking at the undue burden we saw on the businesses. There's some that are, you look at the rec district, they have to flush their pool once a year. What does that cost them? $10,000, $100,000 to flush a pool. The school's another example where we're like, hey, it could be prohibitive for some of those entities.
I guess I
So-
would divide those up into for-profit and not-for-profit type entities. But it's, I mean, I'm not saying it should be a lot higher, but there should be some tiering for commercial usage. I think.
Actually, I kind of like that, throughout the EQRs and leaving the rate.
Well, that would address
consistent.
your
I
issue.
kind of like their approach. Just after an hour of discussion.
What was that you liked? I couldn't copy that.
No, I liked keeping that rate flat for the usage.
Okay.
And auditing the EQRs. I also think that just getting on an EQR schedule that is defined by the entity that it would be very difficult to change that agreement and to change the definitions. I think we've always had 4 different languages going on, SFPs, EQRs in water and wastewater, and it's been very confusing. So I think this is a great start. And this cleans up a lot of the language mess that we've had. I mean, for a long time, we've had single family dwellings being counted, or single family attached being counted as 1 on one end and 0.8 on the other. And those numbers are deviating and creating an auditing error between water and sewer. So I think, just the basis of this is it cleans up a lot of issues, just digging down to the beginning and finding those definitions and having it all rooted off of that one definition or one methodology. Rather than, I mean, I've seen our old tables and some of the commercial space was done by chairs, some that was done by space, some was done by proposed customer base, some was done by, I mean, historically, it was all over the board. When you looked at it, you're like, well, that business doesn't even exist, or it's changed over 4 times. And so I think this is whether the dollar amounts are right, I do like the approach, and I do like that it sets us in a better place for furthering these discussions at any time in the future.
One more question, and I've brought this up before around the billing. Moving from quarterly to monthly, would that not have a positive effect on usage? And people know more real time what they're using versus when they get it 3 months later, or have sticker shock.
I would say monthly billing is a definitive possibility once we are able to change all the meters overnight. And we don't have to drive around and collect data. Rather than doing that every month, we're only having to do it every quarter now, because it takes staff an entire day to drive around and collect data from the old meters. Whereas the new meters, once we get that done, I think going to a quarter, or we could definitely approach monthly billing.
Okay.
And Paul, that monthly read, that is to find problems, right, in the field, in between the billing,
Well, yeah, but.
and be able to notify.
The new AMI meters are daily. So we get-
Oh, yeah, but
Yeah, you would know daily, but also that's cash receivable. That's cash we would have on hand versus waiting 3 months to get our money, right?
Yeah, it's something we can look at. I don't think I think once we have the meter changed and it's not somebody driving around collecting data, that's a distinct possibility.
Okay.
Okay. I think it's much better than what we looked at before. A lot more palatable.
If you go back to page 8, bottom there, it does like, it's still like increased revenue of 220,000 a year in the water fund. Funding those capital projects rather than having to chase grants and postpone stuff. Yep. Capital project.
Anything else from the board before I open it up to the audience here?
Not mentioned.
All right, Mr. Quinn, do you want to take the mic?
Arnold Quinn Fraser.
two things. One, people put in bunk rooms, so they'll put in a 3-bedroom house with a bunk room that'll sleep 12 kids. So that's far more than somebody saying they have 4 bedrooms. So if you're going to play this game of EQRs and rates per bedroom, you got to see what they're putting in their house. The other thing is you can put all these fancy meters you want, but if nobody's watching the meters, you're not going to catch the leaks. Over on Mills Avenue, we had a leak that started in April, according to the town. Nobody said anything until we had it, the backflow meter tested and or the backflow system tested, and we found the leak. It was leaking 500 gallons a day, and it was for 3 months. So what's the point of having the new meters if nobody's watching them?
I don't think you're part of that.
Well, the discussion is the cost, right? So last year when I was on the board, I believe you told us there was a leak in Fraser that cost the town somewhere around $17 million over the time that leak was there.
I don't know why it took that long.
I understand.
It wasn't, taken care of, but again, the point of the workshop is to discuss
Yeah.
changing
But
the rate structure.
I am. We're changing the rate structure.
And a bunkhouse, getting back to the bunkhouse situation. Town staff doesn't go into everybody's house to see what they put in their bedrooms. The building department assigns 3 bedrooms. If somebody has changed it and is renting it, it will come down to the ordinance and the fire department going in and finding out that there's a bunkhouse that's not.
Most of them on the plans, you can see the bunkhouses.
So Parnell,
this
you're
is
the one
rates.
that wanted this change years ago,
So I wanted to
and now
change.
we're making it.
No, I'm not disagreeing with the change in rates. I'm saying we want it. Okay. What I'm saying is the town hasn't looked at how much water we produce versus how much water we use. You guys don't do a study on that. I've asked over and over. You guys won't do a study on that because you don't want to know how much leaks you have in Old Town. I guarantee you all 5 lines in Old Town need to be replaced, the mains. So you're going to do all the rate studies you want, but it's not going to change the cost of money that we're spending on the water system if we're not looking at the real issue. And for a fast food restaurant to use more water, if you charge more water than what a distillery uses, that's criminal.
Yeah, set EQRs at 6.54.
And it's up to review. to make sure that it's done.
Mr.
Yep.
Lipscomb.
Hello, everyone. Clark Lipscomb for the record. First, I would advocate to stick with quarterly billing just from a general overhead perspective. There's a lot of cost in sending bills and coordinating that I don't think you recover through monthly billings. I do believe one of the core components that's missing here is the financials of your water system operations and explaining to the public why you need to raise the rates. I can't ascertain that here, and I once dealt with a multi-year public utility hearing in the state of Hawaii for a water system that we operated there and owned. And it required justification. And I understand you guys don't have PUC governance, but I think you are beholden to the citizens of Fraser to justify why you need this rate increase. And if it's for capital projects, I know those capital projects aren't for the new developments being Rendezvous and Grand Park. And in the case of those communities, the residents in those communities are still paying for their virtually new water plants. In today's world, these are built to last a very long time. And those people are paying property taxes towards the metro districts that built those water plants. It's not fair to Grand Park residents and Rendezvous residents to raise the rates on them and put the burden of capital improvement projects in Old Town Fraser that frankly have existed since before I bought here in 1999 that have just gone unaddressed, ignored and unaddressed. And here's the bigger issue is none of you guys know what construction costs are today, and you don't know where they're going to be tomorrow and the next. But what I can tell you is they're going to outstrip your rate increases here. So trying to fund capital improvement projects on the backs of ratepayers is the wrong approach. If you have immediate needs for capital improvement projects, go float improvement district bonds. Do what they did to pave the streets, Katie. You were here. That's what they did. And the people that benefited from those improvements paid for the property taxes associated with the repayment of the debt. That debt is typically funded over 40 years, which would cost less to the rate users and fix the system immediately, as opposed to trying to build a pot of money. Rates like this, frankly, should be for building replacement reserves, which have never been done here, and for operating the plant. And that's it. Not for trying to address a whole bunch of capital needs that were never planned for and never had reserves built, guys. So I really think y'all need to do a hard look at why you're doing this, what the implications are for the community, and what's the need. I disagree with the EQR approach. And the question I was going to ask Paul is, like, the mill apartment's a good example. It's got 19.2 EQRs. Will it get billed 19.2 EQRs?
153 plus.
Okay. But then it's got a different, if you use the formula that's in here, that's not the formula that was used for those 19.2 EQRs, I do not believe. Okay. But now we've got, and I think this is what Adam was getting to, is we've got a different tap fee structure versus the service fee structure. Is that correct? So we're not messing with a tap fee structure.
It's still gonna be paid. Tap fees are per EQR, so that's gonna. Part of what I said that, I need buy-in on the rate structure, but then clean up EQRs in our code in 13, 14, and 19. That was changed in 2010 and 2012, but no longer aligns with the 2001 JFC agreement.
Okay.
So.
But I guess here's the point, what I'm trying to understand.
Whatever the newest one was that we just agreed to at 19.2, that would change on the sewer side, because those numbers weren't right. We already agreed to the 19.2, so it's 19.2 based on our code for water. It's not in agreement with the JFOC, but we've already agreed to it. So I would not retroactively change any agreements that anything we've already approved is going to stay the same. It's not fair to retroactively change that on a developer who's already gone through everything, asked it for our approval on said. They sent it to us asking, is the 19.2 still valid? We validated it with what we knew at the time. Subsequently, found new information that's changed that. But I'm not going to go back and say that that's different. The tips have already been paid, so it's not, we're not going back for another 200,000.
And Peggy, you were here when we did that. That was to adjust the rates so that apartments were viable, remember, on the tap fee side, because otherwise nobody would ever start an apartment project because the tap fees were so onerous that you couldn't begin to underwrite the project on day one. And I think that was the right thing to do. What wasn't addressed, and that was the service fee. So like this affordable housing project over here is getting hit with 60 quarterly service fees because it's per unit. So there's no correlation to bedrooms, bathrooms, or otherwise. I think fixtures, frankly, that's what they did in Aspen. I think fixtures are a better measure. And then the other thing that I think you really need to evaluate is this commercial thing. Guys, commercial gets creamed with property taxes in this state. Creamed, right? And to hit them with more expenses, I mean, Lewis, you want to focus on not-for-profits. Well, I know a lot of operating businesses in this town that basically could be deemed not-for-profit, right? Because the owners struggle to make a living. And I'm happy to have those services, and I'm happy to have the jobs for the citizens of our town. And I was here when this town was dying for commercial and would do anything to get commercial. And I don't know that all of you were. I know some of you were. But I certainly don't want to be burdening our commercial establishments with kind of unforeseen, unexpected expenses that could really significantly hurt them. And I think that's another consideration that needs to be made here. So again, I would just ask you to look for the justification. What's the need? And be transparent. Be transparent with the financial systems for the water system and the plant and what's it need, right? And then do whatever needs to be done to raise the funds. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else from the board before we adjourn for 30 minutes?
Just like the board agreeable to these rates, or what is the board's direction? At this time. I know how to continue moving forward.
So the summary on that last page it shows that the proposed versus what the current is only a delta of $3.24 a quarter.
On a one EQR. So the one EQRs, it's not, it's
So that's
minimal
it's not a big change.
change that it's based on the direction we're given. Not left over to make it equitable. Larger users are paying more. If you go back to the one table, you know, the 1.6 EQR house during the winter ski season is using an enormous amount of water. Not much water the rest of the season. There's a lot of water here because everybody taking showers, using the restroom. They're not, but generally don't use them. You put 20 people in a house, that's a lot of showers.
That's
a lot
a
of bathrooms.
6-bedroom house.
Right, so,
Yeah.
I just need to know the board's direction, if they're comfortable with this. It's roughly an 18% increase on the service charge, or on the volumetric charge. And if keeping the service charge flat is multiplying that by EQRs. So as Clark was saying on the Mill Avenue apartments, instead of 60 times 153, it would be 19.2 times 153 on those multi-family. I do like that. For those two, I do like that.
I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it's what we asked for, so.
Yeah, although the the commercial does have to be evaluated. We gotta take a harder look at that because I agree. They're getting killed with property tax and it's gonna get worse.
Why was that parcel assigned that, 60 QR? I don't know. We'd have to go back to do some more research on
Yeah.
that, but that's why if the board is structure, we can then start doing audits. To get that all cleaned up before we implement this as a resolution. So we're not gonna change the rates now without having good solid EQR numbers for commercial.
So this is my first viewing and my first involvement in this discussion. I am kind of in agreement. I'm a fan of dedicated funding mechanisms, and I do think property taxes and tap fees have their purpose, and I believe the town is determined to operate 90% off of service fees, and I don't know if that's the wisest decision. I think it's the easier route to take because property taxes go to a public vote, and tap fees are, well, they have the same kind of discussion as the EQR discussion that we're having. As far as this study as an independent, without having to go back a year and interject my ideas, I like where it's going. Like I said, I think it cleans up the language issues. I think if we do find egregious errors, that we can address it based on having those fundamental things better in place.
I'll get it to Michael, get out. But a lot of financials were in the October 23 presentation. It's a lot more detailed on, the revenues and the options to either, these rate increases do not fund their full out. We still have to get the grants. We still have to go after loans. This is just a small increase. Help fund as people were saying, the reserves, capital reserves, the emergency tech funds, but it is starting to build some of that up. But we still have to get grants to do buyers out next year or something similar. I just wanted, the board's direction. If they were comfortable with this, then I can proceed with everything. Thank you.
I'm comfortable.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.